So just quick background on me. I'm the founder of Amplify. We are a consulting, it's just me. I always say we, but I'm a consulting company and a HR executive search firm based outside of Washington, D.C. I'm also a writer for Fast Company and the host of the Redefining HR podcast and author of the upcoming Redefining HR book. So what that means is I basically spend all my time networking with CHROs and CPOs at the leading edge of the field, learning from them and working to amplify modern practices. So this presentation is really an overview of where the field of HR is going in people operations. So let's dig in. When you usually talk about being in HR, sometimes there's a bit of a stigma that you may have to overcome. HR, and this is obviously a very progressive leaning sect of the field, but HR isn't always, as a collective, looked at the most progressive field. You might find yourself at a dinner party and tell your friend Kanye that you work in HR, and this is the response. So that's not always what we're going for when we tell people what we do. And in my mind, there's actually a spectrum of HR. And on the modern edge of the field, which is, I think, where all of the people watching this are today, it's a very transformational field. And I want to get into some of the differences between modern thinking and legacy thinking. So a lot of our wounds in HR are self-inflicted. A lot of the stigmas that we have around the field, the legacy stigmas and perceptions, are things that we've created. So I say we light fire to the whole past stigma and perceptions of legacy HR, and we chart a new path. And whether you call your field talent and culture, people operations, HR, it really doesn't matter. It matters what kind of, what are you practicing? What are the actual tenets of how you operate as a function? And that's what I'm going to be walking you through today. So modern HR is a rocket ship. 2020 has underscored the importance of great HR unlike anything else. It's been a transformational time for humanity, certainly for businesses, and absolutely for HR and people executives. And I have bad news. Yoda is a liar. So I love Yoda. If you're Star Wars fanboys, please don't get upset with me. I'm a big fan of Yoda. He's an instrumental character. But we talk about the future that it's impossible to see yet. We've been talking about the future forever. And the irony isn't lost to me that I'm having this conversation at a conference about people analytics and the future of work. But my concern with us constantly talking about the future of work is that it's somewhat of an abdication of dealing with some of these changes now. When is the future of work? That's a great question. When exactly is it? We've been talking about it for years and years and years since I've been in the field. The future of work is now, right now. We're shifting to remote. We're tackling social injustice embedded in our operations like never before. Our people analytics are incredible. The future of work is now. I think it's time for us to start embracing this for what it is and allowing us to really focus on these changes right now, particularly given all things 2020. So what I'm going to walk you through is just a brief high-level framework of the contrast between kind of legacy thinking and modern thinking in HR. So first off, command and control. The way that a lot of legacy companies and teams structured themselves was all about command and control. They saw command and control as a pathway to power, right? And why? What's this? The proverbial seat at the table, right? I think legacy HR felt, hey, if we engineer all these processes and systems so that everything flows through us, we're going to have power. Everyone will have to come to us for questions. It's our way to get clout and credibility. And so that thinking, it's kind of old school. It's a little old school. And I apologize for younger generations that are watching this. Some of these gifts might be over your head. This is Dr. Evil of Austin Powers fame. But, we got, drunk with this idea of unlimited power. See, I'm keeping the Star Wars theme going. We wanted unlimited power. We felt that if we engineered processes and systems to flow through HR, it was a way for us to be credible and power and have authority. Guess what? That's not how we think today. That's not how modern operators think as it relates to how they structure things. It's all about decentralizing and empowering. We don't want everything to flow through HR. We don't need everything to flow through HR. There isn't a crisis in credibility for modern people teams. They know the impact they bring to the business. And so they create systems and programs that actually allow managers to manage and leaders to lead. And that's a huge contrast. This quote from Amy Thompson, who's the chief people officer for Mattel, really resonated with me. She talks about the role of HR being as a business function to kind of create these frameworks so that the team can function autonomously. It's not about creating more opportunities to control things in HR. It's actually about relinquishing control. So here's another big thing. HR is rooted in compliance. The legacy HR personnel, that was all about how you keep the organization out of trouble, right? And so in doing so, too often we engineer policies against the few, right? We partnered closely with legal, and if any of you are lawyers, I'm not hating on you right now. You provide a great, valuable service, but there's a certain leaning towards risk aversion that allowed us to create policies against the few, right? What's the worst possible thing that an employee could do? Cool, let's assume every employee is going to do that, and let's build a policy to forbid that. Modern HR operators don't work that way. It's about policies for the many. It's about assuming you're hiring adults who are going to make good intentions, who are going to have the best interests of themselves and their teams and the organization as a driving force, and develop to them. And if you have individuals that work against those policies, you address that on a one-off basis. But don't assume everybody is going to be making the worst possible decision, and guard against that. Diversity is another thing. Obviously, in 2020, with the reemergence, I should say, in the shifting conversation narrative around Black Lives Matter and systemic inequity and anti-racism, a lot of organizations and hopefully individuals have taken a deep introspective look at how they think about this. And from a legacy perspective, we always looked at this through a very narrow lens of diversity. And diversity was often something that was looked at as a bolt-on effort to our recruiting practices and our recruiting programs. And it was not something that was actually looked at holistically within the organization. Today's operators think differently. They think about equity. They think about inclusion. They think about representation. They're thinking about belonging, right? These are terms that leading practitioners use today. And why do they do that? The business case is well established as to how more diverse teams operate and more effectively, bring more revenue into the organization. But it's not just about that. It's about creating a culture and an environment where everybody feels welcome. Everybody feels appreciated, not tolerated. And it's very different when you actually look at a end-to-end holistic inclusion strategy that's embedded into every aspect of the employee journey and every aspect of how you operate as a business. It's not just about what does our recruiting funnel and our pipeline look at. It's looking at promotions. It's looking at pay gaps. It's looking at a range of different aspects throughout the organization. You have to be thinking about all elements of the people experience and the employee experience if you're truly committed to building an organization that values equity and inclusion. This idea that for years we got smitten with this notion of culture fit, right? It's not about culture fit. Culture fit has been in many organizations weaponized as a way to actually not pick people that don't think like you, look like you, go to the same schools as you, approach the same problems like you do, come from the same areas that you do. It's all about culture add. Culture is a evolving organism. And so it's about how do you continue to enhance and add to your culture, not just how do you fit people into an existing culture. Annual reviews. What's the reaction you get from employees when you let them know that it's annual review cycle? Yes, they're excited. They're fired up, right? Yay, I get to have a retrospective look back that means nothing and probably doesn't even tie into my compensation. Modern operators aren't thinking about the review process as an annual basis. They're thinking about it as an agile basis. And there's a range of ways to do that, right? You can be quarterly, you can be annually. You can be quarterly, you can be monthly, you can have regular check-ins. But the idea is that you have frequent, often calibrated, agreed upon performance discussions with your teams. And again, I think that, the legacy thinking was around an annual review process. Nobody ever loved that. And that was when you're 365 days later, you're having a retrospective look back at performances. What are the odds that the hiring manager even remembers a lot of the things that happened, right? It's not that valuable. Also, as tenures are shifting as well, the idea that you're going to have to wait a year to have any regular dialogue around your performance is short-sighted. So companies are moving much more closely around agile review processes and programs now. Another piece that we're starting to see more of as it relates to, emerging kind of best-in-class organizations is shattering some of these often gender-based policies and programs that we used to have. 10 years ago, there was much of our policies were dictated by gender norms, right? The mother is going to have a maternity leave. The father might get a week off, right? We didn't talk about paternity leave. And we also heavily gendered who would get what and what policies applied to each person. I think if you look at progressive organizations now, it doesn't matter. The policies are becoming more gender neutral. If you're a parent, you're a parent. Doesn't matter if you're a birth parent, if you're an adoptive parent, if you're a same-sex parent. If you're a parent, you're a parent, and you should have support for that. So I think as you look at progressive organizations, they're less locked into this idea of gender norms that, a father has this, a mother has this, in looking more towards, opposite sex couples. Progressive organizations don't really care. You're a human, you're a parent, whatever the circumstances are, let's support you in that. Let's celebrate you. Let's give you that space to have that. And frankly, for viewers in the US, we're terrible at this. Terrible. And that's, traditionally we're terrible. Today, we're terrible. I think that's starting to change, but it's actually being led more by European-based companies who have operations in the US, who are actually level setting those US employees to their European counterparts. And we're starting to see change come that way. Training. Training is another thing that I think historically, if you look at training and how we viewed the field of training, it was often more of a classroom type environment, right? This is how we thought about training. As if learning can only happen when you're in a room led by a facilitator. And this GIF actually has nothing to do with training, but it was adorable when I saw it and I had to include it. And so this is just, a gratuitous, cute puppy shot. But when you think about real training that happens today, it's about continuous learning. It's about, as Josh Bersin says, learning in the flow of work, right? The field of training has evolved dramatically over the last several years. And now we're in a position where we need on-demand micro learning, snackable learning, realizing that learning can happen anytime. And oftentimes, especially as we're putting our employees in new positions where we're stretching them to work in new roles, they might need clarity in that moment on how to do something. And so if they don't have access to those tools at their disposal to have those answers at that moment, they might not make the same impact. So, again, the mindset around training and learning has certainly evolved from something that was more classroom oriented to ongoing and agile. Metrics and reporting. So all of you are, masters in this space. We've always had metrics and reporting, right? We've had Excel spreadsheets. We had Google Sheets. We had lots of, pivot tables and a way to capture data. But today, we're much more sophisticated. We have analytics. We have insights. We're able to interpret massive data sets and actually extract not just meaningful information, but insights that help steer and shape our strategy. That is a huge shift from the capabilities we had before. And obviously the technology has improved dramatically. Our thinking around it has improved dramatically. Our capabilities have improved dramatically. And, a big testament to people like Al and David Green and many of you who are on the leaders on this space for both working, but also sharing your work, working out loud, helping others see how you're solving different problems and how you're thinking about it, because that openness actually accelerates the field for all of us. And I'll get more into that in a few minutes. The stats, again, for this audience, these all well. 69% of large organizations have people analytics teams today. The business value of people analytics is pretty clear. I'm not going to spend much time here because I know my audience, but you get it. The space and the demand for that is fundamental and foundational to modern HR. Another big difference is when you looked at what HR did and what HR does, I think for years, and the legacy aspect of HR is about employee relations, right? We looked at that element, and that spawned from more, union-driven environments, but then also became more of like conflict management and conflict resolution. And that was probably one of the bigger, aspects of what the field did. Now it's about employee experience. It's about thinking holistically about all the ways that you can support, engage, develop, mentor, coach, grow talent within your organization, from the physical amenities back when we went to offices. Remember those days? Those were fun. To how we're actually supporting employees in this new distributed model that many of us have, where employees are working from home. What resources do they have? How do we communicate with them? How do we keep them engaged? How do we support them going through a global pandemic and political strife and turmoil and racial strife and turmoil? All these things that are happening in 2020. How do we actually support our employees through that? It's a much bigger and broader lens than just thinking about conflict resolution. HR acumen has always been table stakes, right? If you are, whatever your discipline, whether it's, recruiting, benefits, comp, et cetera, you had to understand that field and you had to go fairly deep in that field. Today, that's not enough. Today, we need business acumen. We have to be able to understand. We have to have both, right? Of course, you still need that HR domain expertise, but now you have to have business acumen, particularly in leadership roles. The chief people officer today is a business executive. It's a business operator. And I don't mean that to diminish CHROs of yesteryear, but you've got a really tough job. You've got to advise, coach, and develop your ex-team peers. You've got to keep a pulse on the externally and understand what's happening in the marketplace. You've got to support and lead by example for all of your employees. You've got to lead your team. And you've got to ultimately develop a custom people strategy in a very complex world that supports the business goals and objectives. And you can't do that without business acumen. You just can't. And I would say that, I'm framing this in the lens of a chief people officer or CHRO, certainly not limited to them. If you're a leader in this field, and frankly, in many cases, if you're an individual operator, the better understanding you have of the business, the revenue, the marketing, the sales positioning, the organizational threats, et cetera, the better you're going to be in your role. And I think modern operators understand that, and they work to develop their business acumen in tandem with their field discipline and acumen. Another thing is, I think, old school HR operators tended to have this kind of infallible persona, right? They always wanted to say the right things, be polished, present themselves in a certain way. And nowadays, it's okay to be real. I think we're embracing that as a field in ways that we hadn't always done. And why are we doing that? This is a complex world. We all make mistakes. We're all human. We all have accidents. The idea that you can put on a veneer of infallibility in front of your employees, particularly in 2020, is misguided. You have, it's going to be so much harder for you to connect with them. We're dealing with so many things now: mental health, gender roles, the Me Too movement, race, pronouns, depression, suicide, coming out. All of these are massive, massive things. And as I spend time with modern chief people operators and officers and operators, they're okay actually sharing some of their own experience and some of their own journey around these very difficult things. They're okay being vulnerable and being real. And it's allowing them to actually lead in an authentic way that allows them to build relationships and connect with their employees in ways that veneer will never let you get. This is, to me, the most transformative aspect of modern HR from legacy HR. We used to operate in silos, right? Nobody shared what they did. Nobody shared what they worked on, what they were learning. You maybe saw the results in a fancy HBR paper, but you never saw the actual secret sauce of how that was made. That's changed. As a field, we've collectively embraced open source in ways that even 5 years ago we hadn't. Why is this important? Too often we looked at the field as a zero-sum endeavor, right? If I share what I'm working and that makes you a little bit better, then that might take away from what I'm doing. And that's BS. And I think we know that now, right? I think people understand that a rising tide raises all ships. So if we're able to share our practices, if we're able to work out loud, share templates, resources, et cetera, we all improve. Another aspect is, work is becoming work. Looking at this is some stats actually before the pandemic from Upwork. 51% of freelancers would never go back to a corporate role for any amount of money. That's significant. And that's, I think been impacted even more, obviously, by the pandemic. So historically, we looked at, how to staff projects and looked at talent management around, often FTEs, right? How do we bring in more full-time equivalents? What is our headcount going to look at? Now we're looking at contractors, consultants, freelancers, project-based work. Not that those things are necessarily new, but I think the way that we've embraced the fluidity of the talent market and the resources has certainly evolved. And ultimately, what do all these things get you? The conversations within our businesses shift from why is HR here to why isn't HR here? Modern operators are indispensable to the business and they know it because they practice these things and more. So, you're going to have a business meeting and they're going to want to have that talent advisor as part of that discussion. It's not so much why is HR here, is why isn't HR here? I need my advisor here to help me think through the people component of this new initiative that we're launching. And in many cases, especially when you contrast legacy HR from progressive HR, that's a huge shift. So I want to open it up for questions. And one thing I also want to do as well, if you want a copy of this deck, I mentioned that this deck is actually built on largely on my podcast and conversations with CHROs at Redefining HR, and also the upcoming book that I'll be releasing in January, also called Redefining HR. So if you want to get this deck and resources, links for both of those, you can go to this URL, gettalk.at/redefining/HR-PAFOW, and all that stuff will get directly sent to your inbox. So with that, thanks for having me on. Let me open it up to Al, and we'll see what questions you have.
Yeah, Lars, again, fantastic. I believe that what you're sharing needs to be heard not only far and wide, but by those who want change in their employee experience and in their organization. And let me ask you a pointed question, because there are some comments coming in, but I want to kind of capsulize it with respect to time here. Is this, Why do you think HR organizations aren't transforming enough? And we have COVID going on right now, and there's a lot of crisis management teams that have been spun up, which are fantastic. That being said, I have a fear, and I know many do, that HR is just kind of go back to where it was. And so what are the barriers to true fundamental change in HR from your perspective, and what can we do to overcome them?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. I think, if you look at the evolution of HR, it's been iterative and incremental, right? The process hasn't changed, but we have a new technology to handle a certain aspect of the process, right? And I think that's how we've evolved over the last decade. I think COVID is a massive accelerant for all of these things that we have been talking about, future of work, whether it's distributed work, mental health support, employee well-being, employee experience. This is a big accelerant for all of those things. So I think in terms of your question around the barriers, sometimes it's you don't have a leadership in a people team that has the right level of clout with the executive team to actually push these practices. You might have an executive leadership team that's never had that type of transformational HR, and they don't get it. And so they don't know what they don't have. They've never seen it. They've never been exposed to it. I think 2020 has really reinforced, I think the companies that invested in HR over the last couple of years, the companies that brought in, strong leadership, empowered them, resourced them, they've made the shift to remote quickly. They've adapted well. They've weathered all of these storms that we've seen. And so it's really underscored the value of having great leadership and great teams. Those that haven't, right? I think they've struggled and they continue to struggle. So I think that this will be a big leap forward for the field, but it's always going to be led by, that maybe top 10% of the most progressive kind of sect of HR. They're going to lead the way always. And hopefully we can kind of narrow the gap for that middle tier to kind of catch up and start emulating some of their practices.
Yeah, and it's my hope as well, because there's a cost not only to organizational performance, but to the employees, the workers within those organizations. Correct me if I'm wrong. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Lars, always a pleasure. Before we sign off, when is the book coming out?
Yeah, the book is coming out on January 23rd. Out of Kogan Page is the publisher out of London, so it's available for pre-order now if you want to check it out. And I'm sure if you follow me on social media, you'll be annoyed by my constant plugging as we get a little bit closer. But I want to make it interactive. Obviously, COVID times. I'm not going to be doing a live book tour, so I'm going to get creative with some real interesting kind of digital engagement. Packages and webinars and experiences to just try to bring the book to life in times where I can't do that physically.
Well, I look forward to doing my part to amplify the work that you do, and the book included. So just let me know, and congratulations on getting that over the finish line, or almost to the finish line. So look, I know what I'm going to be doing in late January. I got to read coming. So thanks again.
Yeah, I
really
appreciate the
it.
support, Al. Thank you.